pals, I'm Coral. Welcome back to my channel. It feels weird to be chipper about this because I'm going to be recommending to you some horror that deals heavily in grief, because I feel like that is something I've recently discovered in like the past year and have really enjoyed reading, I guess. That sounds weird, right? But like also people love shows like This Is Us and Grey's Anatomy where it's like trauma porn basically, so this is trauma porn for horror readers, except for there's stuff even worse than this. Anyway, I'm talking about grief today. I'm talking about grief in horror, books that, like I said, deal with grief, not just because in horror, obviously there are lots of times where people die, but not every book where somebody dies focuses on the aftermath of that person's death and you know, follows the characters who are left behind and how they feel. So this is basically what I'm talking about. Books that deal with a death, and then the people, we're following the people who are left behind and how they process things and how they go through life, if they're able to process it. Yeah, anyway, that's what I'm talking about today. I should also say, I guess, that I didn't love all these books, and I guess I will get into that, but you know, all of these fit into that, so I'm going to be talking about them even though I didn't love a couple of them. In particular, Stirring the Sheets by Chad Lutzke. I know this is very well beloved by almost everybody, it seems like. Okay, so with this book, I might be going into some spoiler territory. If you haven't read this and that really bothers you, I mean, I'm not gonna go into depths with this, but I feel like most people know what this is about. But also, I don't know, some of you don't know what this is about. I guess I knew before I picked this up, but I don't know. So if that bothers you, maybe skip forward until I'm done talking about it, because I'm not really sure where the spoilers begin. For somebody who has never heard of this book, it's okay if you need to skip forward. But this is about an elderly man named Emmett, and I'm not sure what the timeline is for this. I can't really remember, but it seems recent, you know, maybe in the past year he's lost his wife. He works in a funeral home, and one day a dead woman's body comes in, and the body reminds him of how his wife looked at one point in her life, you know, 30 or so years ago. The woman had died by suicide, and Emmett decides to take her body home with him. And the way that it's written, you're supposed to see it as kind of like a bittersweet thing. And I guess it kind of is. I mean, this book is so full of grief. He just cannot get over his wife's death. He hasn't even changed the sheets on his bed. He like won't sleep in his bed because that's the last place his wife slept. And he's just, he can't cope with it. And you know, he kind of gets it doesn't go where I thought it would, I guess, as far as like any sort of necrophilia, but it is just like plain disrespectful to like take somebody's body from the funeral home and like put it in your bed and sleep with it. And it was really hard for me to let go of that in my brain, because like I said, the author is not trying to make this some creepy Ted Bundy shit, but like it kind of is that, especially when you think of the fact that this woman died by suicide. She's obviously not having a great go at it, you know, when she decided to take her life, but yet here we are. I don't know. So this does deal a lot with grief, and it's like a grief that I don't ever want to imagine having. You know, the loss of your partner who you love very much. It makes me sad, but also it makes me upset what Emmett did to this woman, and how we're just supposed to see it as this like, aww, kind of a thing. So I can see why people liked it, but also, I don't know, felt creepy to me. Next is a book I absolutely love. This is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I don't often talk about Stephen King books when I'm doing, I guess, discussions like this or recommendations like this, because it's like, who hasn't been recommended a Stephen King book in their life, and probably most of the people who watch my channel have read Stephen King, but this book just fits so perfectly into this, you know, into grief. I mean, this book is about grief and how far you'll go after losing somebody, and oh, this book made me so deeply sad. I've read it, I think I've read it twice, maybe 3 times, but this most recent time was about a year ago. So my daughter is almost 8 now, so you know, she was 6, I guess, probably when I read this, and I hadn't read it since she had been born. And so like it really, and not that you have to be a parent in order to understand grief, but there's just a lot of parallels to how this parent in this book felt. I guess that really affected me this time. This is about, if you don't know, this is about a family. I know the dad's name is Lewis and Rachel, and then their children, Ellie and Gage. Ellie is maybe 8 years old and Gage is a toddler, and they move to this house where there is a very busy highway. Well, it's actually not really a busy highway. It's more like it's a long stretch of highway where there isn't usually much traffic, so lots of big semis drive quickly across that highway, and it is a little bit treacherous, and Lewis loses someone in his family, and he gets this idea about a ancient Native American burial ground behind his house and what might happen if he buries his lost loved one in that cemetery, and things go terribly wrong. But it's not the terribly wrong part that affects me so much. It's the in-between this death and him deciding to, you know, do what he does. And it's just like, you know, what would you stop at to bring back somebody you love, you know? What lengths would you go to? And I can't say I would make a different decision than him if I lost someone I loved. Man, it's a heavy book. All of these are just heavy. They're not gonna make you feel good. But yeah. Next is a book I kind of feel like I talk about a lot when it comes to like unsung horror novels. But this is Suffer the Children by Craig DiLouie, and this is kind of this is multifaceted, I feel like, because it's kind of like an ooky vampire story and kind of like an apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic story, like a pandemic story, and also just like this heavy sense of grief. This is about this, I don't know, disease, plague, I guess, that hits the earth, and it kills off all of the children, all of the children. They're all just suddenly dead, and parents around the world don't know what to do. It's awful and pandemonium, and it's terrible. But then suddenly the children start to come back to life, and they need a special sort of sustenance to keep themselves going. And most of this book really focuses on, kind of like Pet Sematary, what would you do to keep your loved one alive if you thought that they would die if you aren't doing this specific thing, which like might not be a good thing. And yeah, this one gets really creepy. The children in this are so goddamn creepy. It really makes me want to reread this, actually, because of how creepy these little blood-sucking children are. Yeah, this follows like a couple different families, and you know, the lengths that they go to keep their children alive. It's creepy and disturbing and unsettling. Okay, next on my list is another book that I've talked about recently, but it's just so good I can't keep it off this list. However, I cannot find my copy. I've misplaced it in my chaos of a home. I was able to order bookshelves finally from IKEA. I had a flood in my house in November, late November, that destroyed my bookcases. Luckily, my books were absolutely totally okay. It is a fucking miracle, and probably my insurance company should be very thankful about that. But I have not been able to order bookcases since then. I was able to like 3 weeks ago. However, they're not going to be here until July, so it's hard. It's hard. I have books all over my house, and it makes me feel a little bit anxious. Anyway, I have Crossroads by Laurel Hightower somewhere. I just cannot find it right now. And this is a novella, and it's definitely one that when you open it and you start the first page, you are just compelled to sit and read the whole damn thing. This is about a woman named Chris, and she has a grown child named Trey who has died in a car wreck. It's her only child, and she also is divorced, so she is alone dealing with this terrible grief. She goes to the site where Trey was killed in this accident, and she kind of sees it as like this memorial place. She doesn't really like visiting his grave, and so she sees this as the place where she can visit and talk to him. So she is there visiting his memorial site. She's brushing off the little memorial she's created, and a cut on her hand breaks open, and the blood from the cut seeps down into the earth and is just like absorbed. And later that night, she thinks she sees the shadow of her dead son Trey under like the street light outside her home. And this is another book where it's like, what would you give? What would you give? What would you give up? Would you physically give anything away to be able to see a dead loved one? Man, this one was just, I'm thinking about the other ones. This might be the most grim on this list, although they're all pretty grim because, you know, obviously death is grim. But this one made me so sad. It was so hard to put down. It was just so well written, and I can't wait to read more from Laurel Hightower. It's a novella, so I don't want to give too much away, but, you know, it does go, oh gosh, just the length that Chris goes to is terrible. It's just terrible. It's a great book. You should read it. Last on my list today is Remains by Andrew Cull. I actually have a signed copy of this, which is nice. Unfortunately, I did not love this one. However, this might be a book that I need to reread. This is about a woman named Lucy, and she had a young son named Alex who was murdered in this abandoned house. Lucy herself was so crushed by this that she was at some point institutionalized. However, she's worked to kind of stabilize herself, kind of, but somehow ends up back at the house where Alex was murdered, and she's sitting in her car outside this house on a dreary night, and she sees something in the house. So she, you know, slowly starts to go in that house, you know, and things really get turned up from there. It takes a while for the story to get going, which I think was part of my problem with it. And I remember there being some very, very creepy imagery in here and some good body horror. But I also remember being a little bit confused about exactly what is happening to Lucy in this house. And maybe that's purposeful. But just the grief that Lucy has for her son Alex is so great that she's compelled to go back to this horrible house where this horrible thing happened, and she just is reliving this event over and over. Very creepy stuff happening in this house. The story of what happened to Alex is tragic, and Lucy's grief is tragic. It's all around just a tragic tale. So this is where I end this video about horrible, terrible things in horror books. Thank you so much for watching. if you could, you know, give me a rec or two on some horror that revolves around the grief of, I guess, losing someone you love. That's something, like I said, I've really come to, I don't know, enjoy. What's wrong with me? Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books and whether you like them or not, or, you know, whether grief and horror is a thing that you like. I will talk to you all later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.